Hello, I'm Kamla. My guest today is Marc Porat. He was the CEO of an iconic Silicon Valley startup called General Magic. You may not have heard of it because they launched a product, but it didn't take off. But he's also the gentleman who coined the phrase, the information economy. And now you are a venture capitalist and you work with a bunch of startups in the renewable space,
Yes.
clean energy, and you also work with the Super PAC.
Yes, I do. All those things.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
It's a pleasure to have you. You wrote this in 1976, The Information Economy.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, okay, what was the context? What was happening
good
then?
question. Good question.
So I said 1973, the first PC was developed. TCP/ICP was created when you were at Stanford.
Yes.
Maybe right from maybe a couple of buildings away from wherever you were doing a PhD.
Yeah.
1976, the Cray 1 supercomputer was launched.
Yeah.
And 1978, the White House got its first computers. Laserdisc was introduced. WordStar was created.
These are things I did not know.
No, so I was thinking, what was
yeah.
the context? How did you come up with your PhD and this thing called the information economy?
It's really good questions. You know, my formative years, I'm an immigrant. And
But from England?
From England, but actually born in Israel.
Okay.
Educated in England and then then here. And in my late teens and early 20s, there were 5 revolutions going on at the same time. It was a revolutionary era. There was the Vietnam War was raging, and we had that culture war that's similar to what we have now, real division. The feminist movement was roaring, starting to roar. The environmental movement was civil rights. I went and organized in the South, and counterculture. So for my milieu, in the context that you're asking about, is that revolutions are interesting.
But you were cordoned off at Stanford.
I was not at Stanford at that time. It was
But-
pre-Stanford.
Oh, okay.
Pre-Stanford, and I was actually an activist person, and so what we learned from that is that the rules as they're given to us by society are arbitrary. We have the right to rethink them. We took the right to be what they now call to be disruptive. We didn't know that at the time. That's what we were doing. So that's why these 5 revolutions that we were immersed in, basically I think was the entrepreneurial spark for me that said, invent your own. If you don't like what you're seeing, make it better. So with that, now fast forward to Stanford, I was interested in another revolution, which is the information revolution that I knew was coming.
How did you know?
It was in the air, as you said. It was in the air. People were talking about the transformation from industrial to services. I didn't think it was services. Services they can be a restaurant work, or they can be a computer work. I thought it was something more profound than that. And technology driven. I had seen the power of television. When Walter Cronkite said, "Stop the war in Vietnam," it stopped, essentially. Computers were beginning to be everywhere, big ones, big, powerful ones. And I had done my work on a supercomputer. No, sorry, at that time, supercomputer. Now it's a tiny little thing, but it was a computer at Columbia. I lived in the Columbia Computer Center, so computers were there.
But you were majoring in psychology.
I was, in sociology.
Yeah, so what were you doing in the computer center?
I was doing math. I was doing statistics. I was doing modeling. I was doing simulations. I was doing all kinds of things. So coming to Stanford was a natural to then go from there. You know, my dad wrote a book called Microprocessors. Oh. One of the first books I've ever written on the subject. So.
And he was working at SLAC.
He was at Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, which is why we're here. So in any event, that was the context. The context was, what's this revolution about? And it was a PhD, I wanted to make it real, and so I did macroeconomics and documented the rise of the information economy.
You documented the rise.
Yes.
Was it confined to a certain geography, or was it worldwide?
I looked specifically at the United States, and what we looked at was the transformation of the workforce to information workers, people like you, for example, who deal in the world of symbols and knowledge. That's what you deal in. And you're enhanced by technology. Couldn't do it without the technology. And so you're an information worker, and I counted how many are there, and where do they work. And I forecasted that in 1986, there would be a crossover, more information workers than any other sector.
And that's what happened.
And that's exactly what happened.
So the way you describe it, I hope I got this right.
Yes.
The information economy is to produce, process, or transmit economically viable information.
Yes, using information machines and information workers and information companies.
How does this translate to today's world? Because I'm thinking of all the social media sites that are trading our...
Exactly. Power resided always in information, but the information workers or the knowledge people were tiny little sector. It was the priesthood, it was the royalty, it was the intelligentsia.
The pundits.
It was the pundits, the journalists. And when that was spread out to the masses, trouble would follow. Information really is power. So then it became a question of scrambling for power and wealth. And that was going to define, I thought, the world that we're in. And sure enough, Silicon Valley is a perfect expression of that. Silicon Valley is Florence. And Florence was the age of mercantilism and the age of expansion economically in that way. And our Renaissance is about information machines and networks and people using all these things to great benefit.
Very good analogy that you made to Florence and Silicon Valley. So you write this PhD thesis and then you go off to Aspen Institute?
Yes. Very interesting place. There I was, a young person surrounded by these incredibly powerful, mostly men, who had prosecuted the Vietnam War or who were secretaries of state or were leaders of this and that. But what I wanted to do was, I was brought in as a director at the Aspen Institute to work on information and communication, was to make a film, to describe the coming of the information society. So I had a book contract, and I had a movie contract. I decided to make the movie. And I did, and that was called the Information Society. And that introduced concepts, to your point, that are, I think, sort of 1980, it was clear that there was going to be problems. Information overload was a big part of that, which we have today. Haves and have-nots of information.
The digital divide.
The digital divide was clear back then because every era had its haves and have-nots. Nothing remarkable about that. We do too. And privacy, the most current. Facebook went down 18% yesterday, I think. Partly because their business model is based on monetizing your privacy. Very hard to change a business model. So privacy was then, in that film, a major theme. So these things take time to unfold, but they do unfold. And
so you were ahead of your time.
So it seemed, but
no,
it's
so clear. So it seems. And if you thought in 1980 that privacy was going to be an issue, it's taken how many years?
Yeah, and privacy is an interesting thing. Privacy, this is how the culture evolved. Privacy, if we want to talk about that for just a moment, there's a frontier of privacy that keeps shifting. I call it the creepiness frontier. And companies are trying to be just a little bit less than the creepiness frontier would have you be uncomfortable. So you and I, people watching this program, willingly give up information about ourselves as a barter, as an exchange for value that comes, with the value and convenience of services from Facebook and Google and other places, and all e-commerce. And we give them that privacy because we get back something. But the frontier of creepiness is when more is known about you than you know, and you are manipulated in ways that you don't appreciate. And that goes back to the Facebook and the current problems with the last election.
Do you think we'd ever regain that privacy that we had before the internet?
It's redefined. Because it shifts and it moves, it's redefined. So things that you would have felt were sacrosanct 25 years ago, you now freely give. Do you remember the time, maybe if you don't, you're way too young, when using a credit card was a risky proposition.
It was, I remember.
You remember?
Yes.
Now it's not a risky proposition. Now it's online, and now you're off to the
I
races.
still don't give it over the phone.
And that's right. And people are being massively ripped off and hacked, and they will continue to be. But people use it. In fact, it's getting more and more unusual to use currency.
I thought there was a movement where people are actually using currency because...
I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if there's such a movement.
Yeah, I thought, because I think it was a Princeton professor or somebody who has done a study, I forget who, where he said he stopped using credit cards. He actually uses cash.
Yeah, there's a backlash now. As you know, in Silicon Valley, there's a segment, small segment, of high-tech executives and leaders who don't want their child to have any screen time until they're old. So
isn't that ironic,
it's
though?
It's ironic. And so what all this says is that this information society, information economy that we're in, is volatile. It has not found its feet. Its sea legs. It's volatile. It's still changing
When
rapidly.
will it find?
It never will, because the pace of technology is so radical that just about the time you get used to one thing, another thing happens. And so it's constant instability and change of values and change of ethics and change of power relationships. And that's the reality in which we live. And we celebrate and we complain, and life goes on. When the printing press came, Gutenberg, it caused tremendous mischief. It caused awful mischief. It changed the entire relationship between religion and politics. But it took us 100, 200 years to adjust to it. Technology is now changing, where next month there could be a radical change in the technology that throws into question a whole new set of values.
So from Aspen Institute, how did you come back to Silicon Valley, and how did you end up starting General Magic and think that you could be the CEO?
Okay, so back to revolutions. So I was seeing something after my PhD. I've made that, and I've made the film, and it is becoming to crystallize. It's becoming more and more clear. And there was one time when I actually sat with my ex-wife in a restaurant in Manhattan called Un, Deux, Trois, 1, 2, 3, and I drew 3 circles on the paper tablecloth with crayons that were provided by the restaurant. And those 3 circles were the origin of the actual vision that I brought to Apple. One was communication, ubiquity. Something was always there. It had to be with you. That was tiny. Computing, little device, content, publishing and commerce, and you at the center of this Venn diagram. It was intensely personal. It was, who are you going to be, and what's your life going to be? What's my life going to be like living in an information society? And I saw it. At least I felt that I saw it very clearly. I brought it to Apple via Larry Tesler, was the chief scientist, and I said, this is the future of Apple, is this you environment. Internet wasn't much of anything, so we were going to build a cloud, which we did. And we built devices for the cloud, which we did. And there I was, basically proselytizing this within Apple. And the CEO at that time, John Scully, sent me to see Bill Atkinson, who had left Apple already. And he lit up, because the vision, once articulated and presented in a human way, not in a technology, but in a human way, of you in an environment that's knowledge-rich, information-rich, relationship-rich. So compelling. He said, I'm in, and he called Andy Hertzfeld, and I saw Andy a couple of days later, and Andy said, I'm in, and we had the company. So
and you thought you could be the CEO?
It wasn't even a decision, it was just was. I was kind of leading the charge and had been for a while, and and off we went.
Yeah, so in the movie there's a very interesting segment where you're almost poetic. You're like a poet philosopher. You were reading out something, and I'm like, oh wow, So I think when you were introducing the product, I think,
probably.
It was very poetic, and it's very rare that you hear poetry spouting in Silicon Valley.
So I was by myself reflecting on something that others had not seen. So I had to I'm not an engineer, so I had to get deep inside it. And that's where that came from. And I was writing this book called Pocket Crystal.
Oh, so there was a book.
There was a book called Pocket Crystal, and it was a red book, and and it contains all my thoughts.
Is it after Mao's Red Book?
Should have been, because it was a long march for us. It was a very long march. But,
and there was also Cultural Revolution
yes.
that had lived through 5 cultural revolutions.
Exactly. So I had to dig deep to get clear as to what it was I was talking about.
So the product that you were going to make was called the personal communicator.
Yes.
You called it a pocket crystal.
Yes.
And this is the pocket crystal.
Yes, that is a pocket crystal. That is exactly what we had in mind.
But then something happened between your plan, execution, and bringing it to market.
Absolutely.
There was something happened, but then the remnants of your company lived on in other companies, and we got this.
So it seems.
How else do you explain?
We were very early. We were there before there was any digital cellular. We were there before there was micro-miniaturization, and we were just really, really early. And everyone knows that. We knew that at the time. We just thought we could sort of accelerate time and get there. And one of the, to your point, one of the most remarkable things is right now that is 14% of the world market for smartphones. We were making a smartphone. We knew that. The other 85% is Android. Tony Fadell, who's responsible essentially for making iOS and iPhone with his team, and Andy Rubin, who essentially came to Google and made Android, were sitting 10 feet apart. I mean, they're just that close. So the zeitgeist, the air was crackling with creativity. And we were all working on the same thing. People had their own image of what they were working on. We were working on the same thing. So when we ran out of time and energy and hope, we were just exhausted. Just exhausted. And I couldn't do what we had just done for another 5 years. Turned out to be another 12 years I would have had to have done it.
So the company existed for 12 years?
The company existed for 6 when I was there, but the iPhone came out 12 years after we shipped our version of the iPhone.
Okay.
It took Steve Jobs that long, it took the world that long to develop the viability of it.
And I guess Steve Jobs had taken a look at your product.
Yes, he did, yeah. Well, because he knows Andy and Bill very, very well. So he came over and looked at the product.
Okay, and what was his feedback?
He said to Andy, 2 thumbs up. And then I think later Andy said that he actually got some ideas from it, and, but it was very clear that what we were doing was both the wrong thing and the right thing.
What was the wrong thing?
The wrong thing was, in our judgment, it was a little bit too, well, it was too big, it was too thick, too big to put in on your person. And it was, at that time, deemed to be too expensive. Although I must say this, what we sold it for then and what the iPhone sells for now is exactly the same price. So that's what we knew was wrong with it.
But what about the wrong that Apple committed in bringing out Newton?
There is that, but we knew also in 1994 that the web was coming.
But you missed that train. You missed the web train.
We put it in there, but it was too late. We knew that we would need to make, as version number 2, a native web machine that talked internet, and we'd take our cloud that we had done on Telescript and make it open in Java and JavaScript. Ran out of time and energy. So those were the issues that were not solvable.
When you look back at General Magic, and if you were given one more chance, what would you do? Because you are a futurist, you were thinking into the future when you wrote the information economy. You were prescient in the way that you were able to see that, you're going to have a lot more workers who are going to be in the information economy sector or the information sector. If you were given another chance.
There's a paradox. The people that gathered around Andy and Bill and the company and carried the vision inside them. And they were hot. They were on fire. They were all passion. They worked like they've never worked in their lives. They say that today. And they didn't reserve, and I didn't reserve, a piece of myself that would be private, that would be a source of selfness, that was not given to the vision and to the mission. The paradox is you want to give all. You want to throw yourself out there because it's an elixir. It's a state of being that is rare.
And it's all consuming.
It is all consuming, and that's what you want, is to be all consuming. And that's true throughout the ages, whether it's a mathematician doing math, or a painter, or a poet, or it doesn't matter. When you're in that state of flux, it's a level of being that is extraordinary. At the same time, you can't be fully in that state. You have to preserve, and I didn't know that.
And what would preserving that small part do?
It would enable me, to have been more with the family, been more with myself in a more centered way. An identity that was separate from the company. It didn't rise and fall with the company's fortunes. It was a center that I asserted was there. I actually even talked about it, but it wasn't. And it wasn't in it for other people either. And I think that what I would have done differently is to create a culture that was, this is going to sound strange, especially in Silicon Valley, less hot. Slightly more detached, slightly more purposeful, and from hot to cold is a long distance. So it's not going to be a cold company, but it's going to be slightly reserved, slightly detached.
Deaccelerate a bit.
Exactly.
You're going.
That would have made us go faster.
That's what you would do.
That would have made us go. Being slower in that way would have made us go faster. But it would have also allowed us to survive some of the impact of a failure that was very, very damaging personally, and on family and on ourselves. For some people, not everyone.
How do you look at failure today?
How I see failure is, as I said in the film, it's an absolutely essential part of life, of success. It's not avoiding failure is avoiding living. And sometimes failure visits you even when you're not aspiring to anything. It's just circumstance, unfair, unfortunate circumstances of life. So that's part of life. That's the soul will experience failure and sadness in addition to all the other positive emotions. So how I see it is not unusual, absolutely not unusual in Silicon Valley. In fact, it's a badge of honor. It truly is. It's one of the rare few places where, great, you failed, you're not going to make those mistakes again. And that's true. And I think by and large, that's what I learned from that experience. It took a long time to, by the way, come back in a positive frame of mind, longer than I would have expected. But life goes on. I now have a 3.5-year-old and 2 8-month-old babies at home.
So you have a new family.
And one doesn't have babies like that without a sense of optimism.
Yes, yes, this is true.
So,
yeah, I just want to briefly go back. When you shut down General Magic, it must have been a very difficult time and process.
Of course it was, yeah.
It's never easy. Did you go back to your parents and talk to them? Because your mother's a psychologist, your father was in academia, and I don't know if they understood, and I'm just presuming here, that because usually parents will caution their kids to be safe, don't go there, So did you ever go back to them and ask them?
Of course, the entire family was there.
Even your sister Ruth?
Ruth and Nomi and my parents and so on were there. And they said then what people are saying now, which is, oh, you and your team did such wonderful things. Celebrate that. And they understood that I had to go through a period of mourning, and they let me do that. Which is what love is about, is to support a person wherever they are and help them get through it.
So you did come back into tech, that is hardcore tech. You kind of veered off in a different direction, right?
I did one company after that, which was a reverse auction company. You know,
Okay.
Pierre Meteor did an auction company.
Yes, he was a General
He was a
Magic.
General Magic.
That was amazing, that he was a support engineer.
Yeah, and so that so eBay is a auction company. We created a reverse auction company for businesses, so complex procurements and things like that. It still exists today. Very
Okay.
interesting. And then I went off into what became climate change issues, which is where I met my current wife. So
Ah,
we haven't
climate.
solved climate change, but I have a wife from it as a souvenir. But that it was and is something that is super important to me, because there's no, you know, as one of the people I worked with closely said, there is no planet B.
This
There's
is
no plan-
true.
Sometimes there's a plan B, but there's no planet.
Planet B.
And it's going to cause tremendous chaos.
Are you
in my view.
are you optimistic about this climate change and how we are dealing with it?
I'm optimistic that there are people who understand what needs to be done, but in the current, you know, whether with the president that we have and the anti-science phenomenon that is actually getting deeper and wider in the 21st century, that gives one pause.
Do you ever think about the irony of it when you wrote about the information economy, that there would be this anti-science kind of a movement?
Things about human nature continue to amaze me. Remember, my father was a Holocaust survivor. That was human nature gone bad. So I have everybody who's, you know, who's sentient being who thinks about anything, but certainly people who've been through it directly or indirectly are cautious about human nature. Because when put under pressure and put in the hands of a demagogue, really bad things can result. So am I surprised that there's such a strong anti-science? Not really.
Did you see it coming, though, in
No.
this country?
No. One wants to think that cultures become more humanistic and more liberal and more learned and more rational. It's not true. It's all one step forward, two steps back.
What keeps you awake at nights?
On a personal level, one begins to realize that life is finite. One does not know that when one is 18. That brings a certain gravitas to daily matters. And it's not a morbid concept. I think it's an elevating concept. You know, my dad in the last 15 years has evolved in ways that you and I would hope that we can evolve at that age. He's become beatific. He's become, you know, beautiful in a way that was available inside him when he was 18 and available inside you and me. But we cannot access it until we're at a point where we're able to,
Or we allow?
that we allow it to come out because of the circumstance that we now understand that life is not infinite in that way. So that sounds deep and so forth, but it's just something I carry. And sometimes I think about it at night. And on a smaller level, my wife, my 3 little children, my 2 big children, their spouses, my sisters, their kids. Everybody has issues, and that keeps me up at night thinking about them.
So you're deeply engaged with them?
As deeply as one could be, I suppose. I don't, you know, it feels like a
because-
very tight family.
No, because during General Magic, you weren't, like
I
you said,
was not, yeah.
So
I
that's
was-
why I'm asking.
Oh
So,
yes, oh yeah. Now,
so-
now there's a whole level of appreciation of what's important, what's not important. That's becoming very clear. Then on a completely political level, I just am astounded and appalled by what's going on, and that keeps me awake at night.
What pocket crystal do you carry these days?
I carry the same one you do.
Is that a 7?
It's a 7. It's a
Okay.
6X, close enough.
Okay. And how delighted were you when you saw that for the first time?
Thrilled, absolutely thrilled. Oh my goodness! 12 years later, Steve.
Did you have
Jobs
tears?
ships it.
Did you have tears
I
coursing down your
think
cheeks?
I think I did. I was not one of the people that stood in line.
You did?
I did not,
Ah.
because I couldn't stomach the idea of standing in line all night long. But it was thrilling, and when I saw it and saw the software, oh, it's just there. It is.
Did you ever go and tell Steve Jobs anything?
I did not. I did not. Maybe I should have, could have, but I did not.
Okay, so you've owned one since it was released.
Several. I think it's my third one or something.
Third. So for
Third.
10 years, you haven't switched to Android?
Not yet. It's maybe I should.
That's your choice.
Yeah.
That's your choice. And you use this extensively?
All the time. Too much.
Too much.
Of course, like all of us do.
So do you try to wean yourself away from it?
Well, yes. The good thing is I'm not on social media, as I mentioned, because I'm too private. So I don't have that dopamine pigeon, drug thing problem that is an epidemic. I don't have that.
What about an Apple Watch?
Kevin Lynch, who was a magician, is in charge of that. He wears one. He loves it. I'll probably get one, but not at this time.
Okay. So what you imagined so many years ago is now in the hands of 2 billion people or more?
99% of all the people who have smartphones around the world. It will be billions more. Use Andy Rubin's or Tony Fadell's operating system. The other 1%, you might ask, what is that?
What is that?
Microsoft and BlackBerry. 1%.
1%, huh?
Yeah. That itself is a source of awe. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like to be Tony or Andy, walking around the planet and just seeing everybody using their machines, their software, their hardware.
So there is some truth to being too early to the market.
Absolutely. Timing is super important. Super important. Jokingly, I said I was a little bit too good at spinning out of Apple. I should have trudged through for another 5 years. We would have been that much closer to the internet and so on. But in fact, timing is a big part of luck.
And you believe in luck?
I believe in preparation and opportunity, as the Chinese say. But in particular in technology, one has to be very mindful of what is on the
horizon.
Something that you can actually do quickly.
So
the byword is quickly. Put it into market quickly. As Rita Hoffman says, if you're not mortally embarrassed by the thing you just put to market, you shipped it too late. And we were not going to be embarrassed. This is going to be a thing of beauty.
So perfection was your enemy.
Perfection was also the enemy.
So have you changed?
Yes. I learned that lesson.
And what else?
Oh, I'm here, I'm here. I'm thriving with a family and with the things I do. So, all good.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us and being candid with some of the questions that I had for you.
I think candor and openness is a good thing.
Yeah, and it's never easy to revisit.
It's not easy.
Yes.
It's not easy. It takes a decision.
It's like we are passing a judgment on you.
Something like that. Or you have to just relive emotions. Some emotions just never actually, if you go into yourself or your audience, some emotions never quite settle down. But nonetheless, I think it's important.
Thank you so much again.
My pleasure.
If you missed any of our show, you can catch them on our website, kamlashow.com. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back again next week with another new conversation. Until then, goodbye.